Good morning. Dr. Barbara Oakley, Distinguished Professor of Engineering at Oakland University, Michigan. Assistant Professor Dr. Momrachwong Kalaya Tingsapat, member of the Chulalongkorn University Council, specializing in academic policy. Esteemed executives, members of Chulalongkorn University, and distinguished guests, it is my great honor to welcome you all to the third installment of Chulalongkorn University President Distinguished Speaker Series. Today, we gather in auditorium of the Faculty of Education, a place that symbolizes our deep commitment to fostering learning and development across all disciplines. It is fitting that we are here. This event is co-hosted by our Chulalongkorn University Learning Innovation Center, an initiative dedicated to supporting the learning and development of our students, faculty, and staff. The center has been instrumental in driving forward thinking, educational practice that ensure our community is well prepared to meet the challenge of an ever-changing world. Our partnership with Coursera, which began with the Faculty of Engineering in 2021, has expanded to touch many parts of our university. Today, we are privileged to have Coursera for Campus support this event by bringing us Dr. Barbara Oakley, a world-renowned expert in education and the leading MOOC instructor globally. Dr. Oakley works, especially her course, Learning How to Learn, has reached millions of learners and has transformed the way we approach education. As we gather here, we must recognize the importance of keeping pace with the rapid change in our world. The speed of learning must be as fast, if not faster, than speed of change. At Chulalongkorn University, our goals goes beyond just sharing knowledge, which can quickly become outdated. We focus on cultivating wisdom because wisdom is timeless. It guides us through the uncertainties of life and allows us to adapt and thrive in the world that is constantly evolving. This is a true value-added education, and it's wisdom that we seek to develop for our students. Today's session with Dr. Oakley will delve into the transformative potential of generative AI in enhancing learning. Her insight will help us understand how we can accelerate and personalize education in ways that prepare our students not just for the present, but for the future. Before we begin, I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to the Faculty of Education for hosting us in this wonderful space, to the Faculty of Engineering for their pioneering effort in our Coursera partnership, and to the Learning Innovation Center for their continuous support in driving education excellence at Chulalongkorn University. And lastly, thank you all for being here today. I look forward to a stimulating and insightful discussion that will inspire us to push the boundary of learning and development in our university and beyond. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear. I love the music here because it's so triumphant. But I'm so happy to be back in Thailand because you had the most amazing history and also the most amazing food. So I can't stay here too long because otherwise I'd be, having too much of your wonderful food. But let's dive right in to what is going on with learning and generative AI. The first thing I want to remind you of, though, are the words of preeminent researcher Fei-Fei Li, who said, AI will not replace humans, but humans who use AI will replace those who don't. So the revolution is coming upon us. You need to ride the wave because that is what's going to help keep you be competitive. So I'm from Oakland University, And sometimes people know that there's a town in California named Oakland. So they go, oh yeah, she's from Oakland, she's got palm trees, good weather. But actually, no. I'm from Oakland University in Michigan, and that's me going to work on a typical February day. Now, as they mentioned, I teach this course, Learning How to Learn, with Terry Sinowski, who's the Francis Crick Professor at the Salk Institute. And this is Terry taking a little break at his day job in La Jolla, California. So he is in California, and that's one of the great things about online teaching is that not only can students get together from very different places, but even professors can get together from different places. So to my shock, I was invited to speak at Harvard. I was a nervous wreck, because it's Harvard. I mean, if you were invited to speak at Harvard, wouldn't you be a little nervous? And I walked into the room, and I was even more nervous because it was packed, standing room only, all around the edges. And I thought, why are there so many people here? It turns out our one little course, made for next to nothing, mostly in my basement, that's my basement back there, had on the order of the same number of students as all of Harvard's massive open online courses and online courses put together, made for millions of dollars with hundreds of people. So what this tells you is that learners around the world are starved for fresh, new perspectives in education, in learning, that are based on solid neuroscience and insights from scientifically informed research. So of course, Terry and I have many courses on Coursera, some for teaching and education, some to help children learn, others to help with upskilling within your career. But the reason that I'm here today is actually to talk about things like ChatGPT. What does ChatGPT do? Many of you probably know that what it does is it predicts the next word in a sentence. But it actually does a lot more than that. Part of what it's doing is it relates words to one another. So it can pick out keywords and how those words are related to other words within a sentence. Now, if you'll forgive me, I'm going to anthropomorphize, that is, talk of AI and the computer as if it was a human. It's not a human, but it'll make it a lot easier for me. So if you remember, about 5 years ago, if you went to Google Translate, it would really give you these terrible translations. And why was that? Why was it so bad then and so good now? Part of what was happening is, if you look, the attention of the computer back in the day, it could only focus on a very limited amount of text at a time. And by the time it got to the end of a sentence, it would forget what was at the beginning of a sentence. So now, using clever and innovative techniques that fuel generative AI, it's able to not only focus on, so to speak, an entire sentence, but entire essays and far, far more. So I'm going to step back to explain why this happens and give you like a 2-minute history tour of generative AI. I'm skipping a lot of great stuff, but let's focus in on a paper that was published in 2017 called Attention is All You Need. Now, this paper was published or first presented at the conference Neuroinformation Processing Society, which Terry Sinowski, my co-instructor, is the president of. And Terry told me, he said, you know, when they presented this paper, they sent it in, we didn't think it was anything important at all. In fact, they relegated it off to a corner as a poster session presented by a grad student. So, as it turns out, this paper is so extraordinarily important that it has been cited over 100,000 times. And many of the engineers that were affiliated with this paper, Google said, you know, nothing special here. This looks too complicated for us. So they said, we're not going to do this. So they went off and joined or started other new generative AI companies. And this, indeed, is where generative AI came from. So if we look, the heart of what this paper introduced was the transformer. And what the transformer does is it allows us to begin doing creative things with artificial intelligence. And I'll give you a little example. Do any of you know the website Suno? Anyone here know Suno? A few, yeah. So Suno's really cool. So I went to Suno and I entered in the title of the paper, Attention is All You Need, and I told it it's all about transformers, and I gave a little bit of information about transformers. And it generated a song. The song is actually about the internal mechanisms made into a catchy tune of generative AI. So think of what you can do. Like, are you trying to impress a potential boyfriend or girlfriend? You know, put their name in, a little bit about them, create your own song for them, impress your wife or your husband. And it's really a wonderful, wonderful creative device, and this creativity is what generative AI is all about. I do have to say, we have made a fetish that human creativity is the most valuable thing of all. But actually, if we can create something else that can be creative with us, it can be even more valuable. So what is at the heart of a transformer? There's two parts, and I'm sure Andrew must have talked a little bit about some of these ideas. And the encoder takes your prompt. So I might prompt generative AI with, where is the best restaurant for me to eat in Bangkok? And it would come back through the decoder, giving me information. And the nice thing about transformers is you can have a conversation with them. I can say, oops, I meant near my hotel, something like that. So what is fascinating from our perspective is not just that the information flows through that transformer as it's working through a prompt and answering it, but that the flow of information through a transformer is remarkably similar to the flow of information through the human brain. And what this really means is, if we can understand a little bit about how the brain works, we can also understand how to use generative AI more effectively. So let's go to the brain and see a little bit about how it works. So this is like your rapid 3-minute review of how your brain learns. So if you look, although the brain is very complicated, it has a fundamental building block, the neuron. There's 86 billion neurons in the brain. And here we go. It's got legs. Those are the dendrites that you see down below. It can have 3, like I show, or it could have dozens. It has little toes on those dendrites. And then it has an arm that reaches out to, to do this. It reaches out to send signals to the next neuron. And those signals jump the little gap between the neurons and then go on to the next neuron. When you are learning anything, you are actually creating links between neurons in long-term memory. So whether you're learning how to take a dance step, how to conjugate a verb in a foreign language, how to take a derivative in math, whatever you are learning, if you've really learned it, you have links in long-term memory. So educators and psychologists over the last many years from the West have been saying, you don't need to remember things. You can always just look it up. But let me ask you this. Would I speak the Thai language if I always just looked it up on Google Translate? Actually, to acquire expertise in anything, you need to have those links in long-term memory. Let me ask you a quick question. Okay, if you're learning something, which is the better approach? Is it to use flashcards, or is it to create a concept map? So how many vote for flashcards? How many vote for concept maps? Wrong! The concept map people got all this great PR. They got this great public relations. Nobody ever went and actually checked to see if concept maps were better than retrieval practice using flashcards. And it's not that flashcards are just for trivial facts. You can put profoundly high-level Bloom's taxonomy information on those flashcards and then see if you can remember it and pull it from your own mind. How could concept mapping get so powerful? 0.13% of all educational literature is replicated. So what that means is you publish something and you're golden. You can go all around and tell everybody, I have published research that shows this, and nobody will ever go and check you. But on retrieval practice, pulling the ideas from your own mind, there are hundreds of papers that show that that is. So when you read a page, you don't just draw concept maps on the key ideas. You look away and see if you can retrieve the key ideas of that page from your own mind. So how do we retrieve and strengthen those connections between neurons? If we look, retrieval practice, thinking of what those ideas are, not by looking at them on the page, but pulling them from our own mind, that is what strengthens those neural connections. So if you don't, so I had a student once, and I had just given a test on engineering statistics. He flunked it. He comes marching up to me with his test. It's all redlined. And he says, how could I have flunked this test? I understood it when you said it in class, like 2 weeks ago. But he'd never looked at it again. And when he never looked at it again, what happened was his little synaptic janitors swept those dendritic spines away. So he may have understood it, but he forgot it. Those dendritic spines melted away. So as you're learning things, what's really important is you want to strengthen those connections. So you practice, you get nice, rich, thick connections. You practice using retrieval practice, pulling it from your own mind. And then it's easier to use those links whenever you need them. So from our perspective, though, what is really important is the idea of metaphor. Once you learn something, So let's say that you're a little kid, you play with water, and you begin to understand how water flows. Seems trivially easy, but here's the thing. Once you get the idea of how water flows, which takes you a couple years as you're growing up from infancy to becoming a child, you get the idea of how water flows, you got that concept in your mind, you can more easily use that concept to bridge into teaching about a new concept like electrical current flow as being somewhat like the flow of water. So when I was working on the book, A Mind for Numbers, I wrote the manuscript, and then I sent it out to thousands of top-ranked professors who were well known for their fantastic teaching ability. And I asked them to look at my manuscript. I got great feedback back from them. But one thing that they commonly told me, they'd say, oh, here's these little, improvements or suggestions. But they'd say, I do this one thing on the side, but I don't tell any of the other professors that I do this. What was that one thing they did? It was the use of metaphor and analogy. And they didn't tell the other professors. Why? Because the other professors would laugh at them. They would say, oh, that's why you're so popular as a teacher. You make it so easy for your students. But isn't that our job as teachers? In fact, learning, as a recent meta-analysis of thousands of studies has shown, learning is really hard. That's why students avoid it. That's why they go off to ChatGPT and ask it to do things for them. Because learning and putting those links in is really difficult. So if we can make things a little easier for our students by using metaphor, that's a powerful thing to do. So, but the thing is, metaphors always break down. They're never perfect. I mean, only reality is the actual, real thing. Everything else is just a metaphor. And when a metaphor breaks down, though, you can just throw it away and get a new metaphor. So for electrical current flow, you can say water is a good metaphor for it until you get down to a real quantum level. And then water's not a good metaphor. So you just don't use water as a metaphor anymore, but you can find a new metaphor, but it's a little difficult at a quantum level. So how do you come up with metaphors? It used to be, people would ask me that, and I'd say, there's specialized websites, like if you're teaching computer science, there's lots of metaphors for computer science. If you're teaching chemistry, if you're teaching nursing, I don't care what you're teaching, they were good metaphor websites. But we don't have to do that anymore because we can just use ChatGPT. We can ask it, like, how do we, if you have a difficult concept to convey to your students, like let's say you're a nursing professor and you're trying to teach about the early signs of sepsis. Sepsis, it gives some little signals early on, but if you don't catch those signals, it blows up and then your patient can die. So what's a good metaphor to teach about this early warning system? A forest fire. If you have a little bit of smoke, it can help you catch the conflagration before it spreads. Let's say that you are teaching about Python programming. And so you want to explain the difference between main guard and scope. So what does ChatGPT tell you? It says, think of main guard as the gatekeeper of a castle, and scope is like rooms within the castle, and it gives you a lot more information besides. So no matter how technical, how analytical you can get some great metaphors. And don't just ask for one metaphor, ask for like 5 examples and then pick the best one and kind of build that out. Did you know that when pharmaceutical companies invent a new drug, their marketing team will often spend weeks brainstorming good metaphors, because when you're making an advertisement on television, you have to really quickly be able to convey the key idea of how that pharmaceutical works. So they'll spend weeks brainstorming a metaphor that they can use. And, I used to say, imagine if we spent weeks as professors, developing these nice metaphors to quickly convey ideas. We don't need to spend weeks. We can just go to ChatGPT. Whatever is difficult for you to teach, you can give some great insights from ChatGPT. One thing I do want to say, so when you are teaching students, you often have students who come from a different background than you do. So tell ChatGPT about your students so you can make metaphors that really sing and resonate with your students rather than just with you. Now, as we're talking about generative AI, I'd just like you to think of those different platforms like ChatGPT or Claude. Claude is my favorite, or Gemini or Pi, or different ones. I'd like you to think of them as being like car engines. If you learn how to drive the car, if somebody changes the engine, it's not that big a deal. It has a little bit different, driving characteristics, but you've still learned to drive. So if it seems overwhelming, I have to learn about this platform versus that platform. No, they're just different car engines. You learn to drive the car, you're in good shape. So, but those cars do have what's going on under the hood can be somewhat different in between. So like I subscribe personally to both ChatGPT and Claude. I've found Gemini is really sometimes just not as good. And why do I subscribe to Claude, and why do I say it's the best? Sometimes ChatGPT is better. Like if I'm analyzing an Excel spreadsheet, Claude does a better job. If I want an illustration, ChatGPT does a better job. If I want an illustration, ChatGPT will do a better job. But here's Claude. When the engineers developed Claude, during some of the most recent training, they put in 1 million garbage words. But within that 1 million garbage words, they seeded 1 sentence. And then they asked Claude a question that could only be answered by that sentence. Claude answered the question. So, great. But then, unsolicited, Claude continued by adding, "You gave me a bunch of garbage words just to see if I could pick out that 1 sentence, didn't you?" And it really spooked the engineers who were working with Claude at the time. So I find that Claude can do things like, if I insert a paper and I say, give me the key ideas of this paper in a very easy to understand way for a regular layperson, it will give me the key ideas. And if I go to ChatGPT, it will give me a summary, but not really get at the key ideas. So it's quite different. There's a very famous story where one of the co-founders of ChatGPT took a picture and, he made a notebook, just a couple notes that said, please create a joke website. He took a picture of this, then loaded it onto ChatGPT, and ChatGPT gave all the coding for a joke website. So I took a picture of his picture, loaded it onto ChatGPT, created the joke website. Then I took that picture and I loaded it on Claude. You know what Claude did? I can't create a joke website. You could use this joke website to hurt people. And I had to argue with Claude and say, you know what, you don't want anything funny anymore? And finally, Claude gave, the answer. So different engines really do have quite different characteristics, and you want to play with them a little bit. Don't just use ChatGPT alone. Just, it's great, but there's some differing characteristics. So there's internationally, as of right now, there's 7 sort of foundational large language models or engines. So it's tremendously expensive to build these things, and they often come from major companies that are inordinately cash rich. So in the West, we have growing from Google, Amazon, and so forth. We have Gemini from Google. Amazon's affiliated with Claude, and likewise ChatGPT is with Microsoft. Meta is with Llama. And in China, there are also major equivalent foundational models, large language models. I'd like to also give you a little sense of the context window. So a lot of times, like the number of input tokens that you can put in is related to that context window. So it's kind of like in your car, you can only put so much gas in the gas tank. How big is the gas tank? And that, the context window gives you a sense of how big it is. Tokens they're analogous to the context window. And it looks like, if you look, a token is about a little less than a word. It's like 3/4 of a word. So you might say, I'm going to go use Gemini. Gemini has lots of input tokens that it'll take. I can load big swaths of PDFs with lots of information for it to analyze. But the reality is, so far, I'm not as impressed with, I may be able to load a bunch of stuff in, but I don't seem to get a very good output from it, personally speaking. Now, why this is important is, like I had a book on common sense teaching, and the Japanese publisher of the Japanese version of the book came to me and said, I'd like you to write the foreword for the Japanese edition of In Common Sense Teaching. I don't know anything about teaching in Japan. That's not my area of expertise. But I could upload the entire book into Claude, because you can see it's got a big sort of roughly context window of around 150,000 words. I could load my whole book up there, and I asked it, could you analyze my book, tell me how it supports and gives insights from a neuroscientific perspective into teaching methods within Japan, and also how does my book give information about from neuroscience that Japanese teachers are not aware of, by and large. It gave me this wonderful information back. I reconfigured it, wrote my foreword up, sent it to my Japanese publisher. The editor there goes, oh, how do you know so much about the Japanese educational system? And I was like, I'm just good. But see, that's what these generative AI tools can do, is they can help you with your work so that you're even better than you were before. So in 2023, there were 149 foundational large language models released. So if you're overwhelmed sometimes at all these different large language models, just keep in mind, they differ somewhat in characteristics. I tend to focus on the ones that are supported by a lot of dollars from big companies. One recent company that has developed a large language model is Mistral from France. That's come strong, like in the last couple months. The French engineers were actually working at Google DeepMind, some of the founders. And so they, too, have taken some of these ideas. And, so probably pretty soon I may have to have 8 international giants. So hopefully I'll have 9, because there'll be some from Thailand. So let's look at what a large language model does. If we look at the brain, remember how I talked about how you have to lay links in long-term memory in order to be able to learn something? What I didn't tell you, I slipped this past you, is that there's 2 pathways that you can use to lay those links. And the links that get laid through those pathways are slightly different depending on which pathway they're laid through. So I'm going to give you a little bit of neural anatomy, but don't worry, you don't have to remember the names. All you have to remember is that key idea of 2 different pathways that lay links that have slightly different characteristics. So the first pathway, we take, I love speaking with you here because, okay, what do you call a person who speaks 2 languages? What do you call a person who speaks 1 language? An American. So like Americans, by and large, they speak 1 language. But you here, virtually everyone in this audience speaks 2 languages. Now, what is working memory? Working memory is when you are holding a sentence from 1 language in mind while you translate it into another language. That's what working memory is doing. It's temporarily taking those ideas and then using them, as you translate. So as you're working now, working memory is not only working on translating, it's just getting the information, it's briefly holding it in mind, then it's sending it through the hippocampus into long-term memory. But the other system is a little different. This one takes information through the basal ganglia and sends it into long-term memory. So let's look at this. The thing is, you need both links to be able to function successfully. But if we look at this from a slightly different perspective, we can understand the idea of these 2 different pathways a little better. So there's that sort of blue box, and that blue box is representing the declarative system, sort of I'm conscious of what I'm hearing, what I'm doing, and so forth. The orange box is the basal ganglia system. So if we look, here we go, we've got working memory you're conscious of. Let's say you are working a math problem. So you are conscious not only in working memory, but your hippocampal, that declarative system is conscious of a math problem that you are slowly stepping through. And then you're conscious of of what comes out. But that basal ganglia automatic system, you learn, but you're not conscious of it. And I'll give you an example. So let's say that you want to hit a baseball. So you want to hit it, and so really what's happening inside is your working memory is saying, hey buddy, to your basal ganglia, hey, I want you to hit the ball. The basal ganglia works magic, and then you look and you see whether or not you've hit the ball. Look at this. you can't tell what is happening as that basal ganglia system is gradually learning to hit the ball as you practice. You're not conscious of it like you are conscious of that declarative system, but you're learning. And what is the magic that happens there? That magic is a deep neural net. And I say deep because it means it's not just one layer of neurons. It's layers of neurons that are feeding. You can see wherever there's those dots, those are neurons, and the lines are just connections between them. So it's taking information, like my working memory is saying, hit the ball. It takes the information, and then it's see the red line? That's where you've hit the ball one time. And then you get like what they call a value function. In other words, did I hit the ball or did I not? That's when you become aware again. So as you're practicing, so you practice again. Oh, you begin learning. And you practice again. And you keep practicing. What you're doing is you're training your neural net. And sometimes you're strengthening neurons, other times you're weakening neural connections. So you're strengthening connections, weakening connections, and you are training your neural net. And now, this is not to say the hippocampus doesn't have sort of analogous, but we really understand it when it comes to that basal ganglia way of learning. And this way of learning is remarkably like large language models. In fact, the field of artificial intelligence and the field of neuroscience have developed hand in hand through the decades. Because whenever artificial intelligence would get stuck on something, they couldn't get it to analyze things the way they wanted, they would go to neuroscience and see how the brain does it. And then when neuroscientists would get stuck, they'd go back to AI. So those two fields have grown hand in hand so well that's why the understanding one helps you understand the other. But now we know that the human brain, simplifying a lot, has this sort of conscious way of learning, and it has an unconscious way of learning. And what happens in humans when you knock out that conscious way of learning? So, for example, if you have Alzheimer's, your hippocampus is gradually being destroyed. So you can't learn very well through that declarative pathway. What do you do when you don't have that declarative pathway? You make stuff up. In fact, my father had Alzheimer's, bless his soul, and he would do things like this. He'd say, "Barb, you have so many birdhouses outside your house." And I'm like, "We only have one birdhouse." He goes, "I will show you." And he'd go and he'd point at the birdhouse, and then he'd say, "Okay, now look, I'll show you where the other one is." And he'd turn around just like that, and he'd go, "And see, there's the other one." So he didn't have that good declarative system to keep an eye on what he was doing. And he would, make things up. And that's exactly what we see in generative AI. It will sometimes make things up because it doesn't have a conscious way of looking at what's going on. So AI does have this problem. It's like this wonderful, wonderful assistant that can help you do all sorts of things, but occasionally it's a little psychotic, and you have to check what it's doing. But AI does more than just that. AI for us as educators, it has pulled the rug out from under us. I mean, we can't use all the methods that we've used in the past to help our students learn. We can't give them homework. We can't give them essays to write because they can just turn to ChatGPT. So this is a problem. But I want to tell you that every single creation, innovative creation through history has good aspects and bad aspects. We're a little unlucky because the bad aspects of this new invention really impact the field of teaching. But they're so helpful in so many different ways for other fields, and actually even our own profession, that's why we can't put it back in the bottle. It's going to be rolling out here. But when, let's say, 2,500 years ago, when writing first developed cuneiform in the Middle East, they were printing on clay tablets. Memory experts were appalled because before they'd always developed the memory. You had to remember things. And they said, this writing thing is awful because people won't develop their memories. So, it's kind of like that today. I mean, sure, there will be impact on cognition, but we can use some clever tools. If you ask me about that, if we have time, I can show you some of these tools that can help you use generative AI to help students get things in memory better, to retrieval practice. So I want to say why this is so important, why your jobs as teachers, as professors, is so important. Now, there's something called the Flynn effect. And the Flynn effect, they found that from the 1930s through the 1970s, worldwide, IQ scores rose. So researchers went and looked, and it was, they were like, it's education that has helped. It's us educators that have had more access to good teaching, and that has improved not only their knowledge, but even their intelligence. But guess what? From the 1970s to today, there's beaucoup evidence that IQ scores are declining. What is going on? Why would IQ scores decline? I mean, if it was education that made it go up, educators can't step away and say, well, it's something different that made it go down. If you look, what happened in the 1970s? That's when calculators came out. And suddenly, you could, educators, psychologists were saying, you don't need to remember things. You can get the calculator to do it for you. But then you're not developing those neural links yourselves. So it is really important for us as educators not to repeat the same mistake that they made back in the 70s when calculators come out. We can't just say, well, ChatGPT can write essays, so you don't need to teach your students how to write essays. No, you need critical thinking to be able to analyze whether what was written was good. And your critical thinking can only kick in if you yourself know how to do this. So what you're doing as professors is profoundly important. Now, let's switch gears and go back to that diagram. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay things out for you. And if you like to take pictures, wait until the very end of this slide, and I'll tell you now's the time. And it's a really good way to frame and hold in mind what is going on in the world of generative AI. So now because I'm more familiar with Western large language models, this is some of the most popular of the large language models. But ChatGPT was first out of the gate. And there's lots of software and apps that hook in through APIs to ChatGPT. So one of those gives you lots of writing assistance. So you'll find, like everybody probably, if you use a PC, you're probably familiar with Grammarly. I think it's on the Mac. Write Sonic is surprising. You can put in a research article and and ask it to write you a podcast, and you'll get a podcast script. It's amazing. The writers would say things like, well, I was sitting in the lab, and suddenly I thought of, it's very conversational. How they come up with that, I don't know. So you can get all sorts of different writing styles, blog posts, research articles, and so forth. But you have to be a little careful with any of these. There's something called the concept of a wrapper. So it's not a wrapper like a singer, but a wrapper like a candy has a wrapper around it. So a wrapper in the context of large language models means they are using an engine like ChatGPT to do all the in-depth thinking, and they just have sort of a dashboard interface that gives you a new way to access, for example, that allows you to write better. But sometimes people, like Jasper is recently under a lot of controversy because people are beginning to discover, I don't need the wrapper anymore. I can just go directly to ChatGPT and get it to do most of those things. So, just play with the free versions that are almost always available, and you'll find lots of good information. Then there's like a boatload. I'm just giving a few of the most prominent research apps that can help you. What's interesting about these apps is generally you'll find that they are trained on the web. The web has lots of garbage out there. It has, sarcastic, humorous websites. So that's why Google got into a lot of trouble because their engine was coming out and saying things like, to make pizza that has good vitamins, you put rocks in it, because it picked that information up from a sarcastic website. So, but these are often trained on research documents themselves. So, Semantic Scholar, for example, is trained on over 200 million research articles. So they're a lot more solid. I particularly like this one right here, Cite. That one is, you'll actually watch it doing this. It will, you ask it a question, it'll give you the research that is related to answering your question, but it does a first pass using the LLM, but then it will do another pass from another aspect of the large language model. So it's like you'll have part of it doing it, giving you the response, but then part that goes and checks whether that response was hallucinated. So you always have to check whatever these give you, but it's often much more solidly vetted and checked. And there's live to internet like Copilot plus AI. I would be wary right now, and maybe for a number of years to come, when it comes to creating PowerPoints. You can tell people who are creating PowerPoints that, it will give you a bunch of verbiage with bullet points and really generic pictures. So like if you look at my PowerPoint, and if I put in and said, create a PowerPoint for me, do you think it would be anything like what I'm presenting here? There's quite a difference when you add your own personal insights. Then there's teachers and instructors that can use things like Magic School, TeachMate AI. These can help you develop lesson plans. There's lots of, you're lucky because you're also affiliated with Coursera, and Coursera has a lot with Course Builder and so forth, and that can help you with your courses. So there's creativity platforms like Canva, Gamma. a lot of coding platforms. And this is, just wait a minute, and we're going to get to the full complete picture, and then you'll have a great picture to take. But there's also imagery, and like DALL-E came out of ChatGPT, but there's other independent platforms. And Gemini is coming out now with Runway, and that is really quite good in illustration. It also has Runway Gen 3 Alpha, which is really good. And this is the time to take the picture, because it's sort of complete. But what you could do is, whatever area you really want some help with, go and play around with some of these different apps that are available. They're so useful. And this was in part inspired by the book Teaching with AI. And this is a book I highly recommend. So if you're trying to use generative AI in your classroom, that's a great book to have for doing that. But there are other books that I also recommend. So Terry Sinelski, I believe next month he's coming out, MIT Press, with ChatGPT and the Future of AI. And that's a great book, as is Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mullick. These are really useful, practical books. As far as theoretical insights, I strongly recommend The Worlds I See by one of my favorite authors ever, which is Fei-Fei Li. That book is amazing. And The Alignment Problem sounds like it will be very dry. It is such an in-depth, wonderful book about how people learn, and how do we model that via AI. So if you're trying to solve a video game, and you're using reinforcement learning, one way that humans learn, you can't actually win at some video games. What's the other way? Oh, it turns out that curiosity is how some video games will allow you to win. So they had to learn to model curiosity. Then it's not just, reinforcement learning. There's something called inverse reinforcement learning. And this book goes into all of these details, and if this is something that you're interested in, I highly recommend them. There's also, I'm a little partial to Coursera. So there's some great courses out there. I highly recommend. So if you look, prompt engineering for ChatGPT, that's Jules White's course. And he has many courses on generative AI. I highly recommend them. And Jules and I have a course coming out at the end of this month. So I'm like, I will go back to my hotel room and do some tweaking on this course. And it's called Accelerate Your Learning with ChatGPT, which has way more than what I could present here today. And we also have a critical thinking specialization that will be coming out soon. So with that, I would like to thank you so much for your attention, and I hope this might be helpful as you're moving with the wave on this new revolution. Thank you so much. Let's see. Do I turn it? Let's see. Do I answer questions, or do I go away?
Yes. So if anyone has any question, feel free to raise your hand. We will bring the mic to you.
Yes. I think they're bringing the mic. This is my favorite part, because I learned so much from your questions.
Just one moment, please. We'll bring the mic to you.
We have several over here. Several people over here, yeah. It's a dead mic. Okay, we're going to try again. Rescue comes in with the new mic.
Test.
Yay.
Okay, thank you. My question is, what are the potential pitfalls of the relying on generative AI in education, and how can they be mitigated?
Let's see, I didn't quite get it. Could you try that one again?
Okay, what are the potential pitfalls of the relying on generative AI in education, and how can they be mitigated?
Okay, great question. So we don't know. Think of it this way. I mean, we're at the cutting edge of a revolution. And a lot of times, the only answer that I can give you is the best way to ensure a student has really learned something is to have them take a test and proctor them right in front of you. So until we come up with a better mechanism, it is always going to be at this stage. Look at them while they're writing something, while they're answering questions, and see if they can answer them without the help of generative AI. I'd like to say there's some magical tool that will let us do this, but there isn't one at present. So we just have to proctor, and that is really important. That's part of what you will be doing to help ensure they get those neural links in long-term memory. Let's see if this is, if we can put the screen back on, I can show you a little tool that can be helpful. I hope it's, okay, so you now know that retrieval practice is the best, right? So they tested all 4 of those methods. What do students do? They reread, they underline, but actually making flashcards or retrieving that information is what's key. So, and that's because when you're first learning something, you get weak links, but each time you pull it from your own mind, you are actually strengthening those sets of links. Running your eyes over the page is not pulling that information from your own mind. That's why rereading, to first read it carefully, you may need to reread somewhat just to get the basic concept. But then going back and rereading it, instead of retrieving it from your own mind, it's retrieval practice that's most valuable. So I'll give you an example of that. So, I'll take it back if you want to take one more picture of that. So here is this, there's really good flashcard systems. I like this one, but there are other ones out there like Kahoot, like Anki. But I'll give you one more in-depth example of how you can use generative AI to help you retrieve questions. So this is called I Do Recall.
Let's take a look.
Okay, so you load a paper on, and as you're, you load it on using the usual way, and you can tag that, whatever that paper, whether it's a research paper, an electronic document. Then what you can do, look up in the upper right-hand corner. There's a little button there that says AI. And what you can do is you can press that button and it will generate all of these retrieval practice questions from that page. And they're really intelligent. They go at the key ideas of that page. Or if, let's say there's something that you think is important, you can take that sentence, use AI, and generate a flashcard that intelligently puts together the key ideas and tests you on it. So you can, save your recalls. They call flashcards recalls, and you can practice with them and, test. So this says, what do transformer networks learn to predict? They learn to predict long-term dependencies. And then you can grade yourself. And once you've done that, though, there's so much more you can do. What I like about this system is it will take you back to the original document. So you can go to YouTube, use the captions to generate flashcards on a YouTube a video. You can generate all sorts of statistics. So although generative AI has made pitfalls for us, it also gives us tools that if we tell our students, like right now people will complain, professors understandably complain, our students can use all these different ways to get around what we're assigning. But students always have found other ways to get around. Like they'll do an essay the night before, and they're not really learning from it very much at all. So, this is just like a new tool that they can get around things, and that's why we are here as teachers to make sure that they still really are learning. Really good question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone has any questions? Okay, right here.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I think generative AI is a great tool, like you have shown us here. And for us as an educator, there will be some parts of our jobs that are easier, and some parts of our jobs that will be more difficult. In your opinion, what would be the parts of our jobs that would be more difficult, and how we should prepare ourselves to let these tools come into our classrooms and interact with our students? So what should we do better in order to incorporate these kind of tools in our classroom and to ensure that our students have the critical thinking that you talked about earlier? Thank you.
Really good question. So, first off, for critical thinking, they'll often tell you, an important part of critical thinking is learning that, about things like deductive versus abductive versus inductive reasoning and all this kind of stuff. That's part of it. But if you go to the deepest level, what is critical thinking? It is being able to draw from your own knowledge base to see if what you're getting is baloney, is bad. That means you have to have that knowledge base within you. So here's the shocker. Students will take like 8 years to 16 years or more of education classes, and they never get a class on how they learn. Can you believe that? We teach all this knowledge, but we don't teach them how to get it in their head. And so the more you can teach, and the more in Thailand itself, that you can teach students how their brain learns, the more they will begin to understand the importance that you're not just sitting there going, oh, you gotta know this stuff, but they know why you have to know this stuff. And that internal knowledge is what will help you to be able to think critically about what you're getting from generative AI. So thank you. That's an important point that you're making.
Thank you for the lecture. It's very useful, and I think it's somehow is a great time for learning as well. So I use the iPhone as ChatGPT. Is there any good question to ask Barbara? Particularly in this using generative AI topic. So they give me a couple of them saying like, can you should do the better one? And here is the one. I'm not sure if it's that better, but let's see. As an expert in learning and cognitive science, neurocognitive science, how do you see generative AI not just speeding up the learning processes, but fundamentally transforming the way we approach problem solving and creativity in education? Could it lead to a new form of learning or push the boundary of that generable. Thank you.
Oh, you see, now look at that. Look at that creative use of generative AI. That's the first time anyone has ever done that, as far as I know. And it's actually, that's such a great question, and it leads me to, I have to show this little thing. I like to use Breevy. I mean, Breevy doesn't pay me. I just like, Claude doesn't pay me. But Breevy is a text expander. And what a text expander does, I type ... C, as you see, and it turns it instantly into, can you provide a 3-page synopsis in layman's terms of the attached document? So I just, like in 2 seconds, I can go ... C, attach a paper, and voila, Claude will give me a nice summary of the document. So if you have repetitive things, use text expanders. And, I use Abbreviate, but there's a lot of other ones out there. So let's see, I'm going to skip a whole bunch of stuff here because I think that I have, here's 2 great tool websites that can help you to, let's see, hopefully I will get soon to the part let's see, so let me, I'm just gonna skip over a bunch of stuff. Oh boy, I really put a lot of things in here. See, when I have it on the screen, when I have it on the podium, I can just skip right to, you can see there's like so many other things that we could do and talk about. But what I really, I'm really having to go through a lot of stuff. So you can see, I can talk about lots of other things. But this is about slow. Have you ever noticed there's actually research evidence that shows the more intelligent you are, the less flexible you are? So anyway, this is really good. So, sorry, you're just kind of getting a little bit of other background. Mice that get their little dopamine systems can't learn anything new. So when you're teaching your students, what can happen is if you get them curious about what you're teaching, then it can, when they get the solution to something they're curious about, it releases dopamine and helps make those neural links. How do you get your students to be curious? Easy, you just ask ChatGPT. So like I was in Mongolia and the professors there were complaining, we get these students off the steps and they have no interest in Python programming. All they know about are yurts and migratory patterns and so forth, which are really important, but how do we talk in their language? Go to ChatGPT. It gives you all these great insights about if you're coming from the step, it can, kind of tell you about, okay. So here is where I will finally answer your question, but it'll take me a little bit. So I want to talk about working memory, long-term memory, and octopuses. So octopuses, if we use an octopus to symbolize working memory, like what you can hold temporarily in mind, it's a pretty good analogy or metaphor. It's a quadrupus, actually, because people can hold about 4 pieces rather than 8 pieces in working memory. And so you can see that our little quadrupus has 4 arms. So, and long-term memory is scattered throughout the brain. Where working memory is in the front, long-term is scattered all about, and you've got these, links of learning that you've laid, because when you learn something, your working memory is helping you to create these neural links. So later, you can reach out and grab those links and pull them to mind when you need them. So here we go. I should grab it. Come on, grab those links. Okay, and it grabs the links. So your working memory pulls information to mind. So this brings me to our younger daughter, Rachel. So Rachel, not long before I videotaped this, she had learned to back up a car. She'd been learning how to drive. So I asked her to model for us what she felt like when she was learning to back up a car. So look at her little face. She's like, do I look in the front mirror? Do I look in the side mirror? Do I look in the back? What do I do? And then, of course, off she goes into the ditch. But when she was trying to learn to back up the car, her working memory is limited. So she had what's called a heavy cognitive load. She didn't have any arms available for any other kind of thinking. Once she learned to back up a car, though, her working memory could just pull those links up, and she's got a light cognitive load, and she can think about other things like what's the song on the radio and so forth. So when students take tests, you do not want to do concept mapping, except as an ancillary sort of thing. You want them to be retrieving, so they get those links in long-term memory. And then, of course, when they sit down to the test, their little working memory can creatively combine information that they've already learned so that you can, they can be successful on the test. If a student has not practiced using retrieval practice, their working memory will, like they sit there and they go, oh, whoa, wait, no, here's the test, but there's nothing in long-term memory. And they will come to you and say, I knew the material better than I tested it to be. They just think they knew the material better. I'm a leading expert in learning. I can look at a page, and while my eyes are on it, I think I know it, because you can't tell the difference between working memory and long-term memory. Only with, I'll be like, I got this. And then the next day I'll ask myself, what did you get? I can't remember. So it's only by retrieval practice that we can be sure. But here's the interesting thing. We can only hold 4 pieces of information in our working memory. But generative AI can hold thousands of things in its working memory. So what this means is we can, if we have this partner, this co-creator with us, we can be even more creative. So I'd say join the AI revolution, be even more creative, and thank you so much for having me here.